Listen to the voice inside your head the moment you fail, delay, or drop the ball. It doesn't sound like a villain. It sounds like a rational, logical friend. It tells you that you were too tired, that the timing was wrong, that someone else messed up, or that the resources just weren't there. You nod along, feeling instantly relieved. To an untrained mind, that quiet internal narrative feels like a valid explanation. But in behavioral mechanics and human profiling, we don't buy manufactured stories, we analyze operational reality. Here is the brutal, scientific truth. An excuse is simply a high-friction lie your brain invents to soothe your ego when your execution falls short. Every single excuse you make is an explicit surrender of your authority. You are broadcasting to your own nervous system that external variables possess more leverage over your life than your own internal willpower. You trade your power for a temporary hit of comfort, trapping yourself in a cycle of self-perpetuated helplessness. If you turn away right now, you will keep letting your subconscious mind negotiate you out of your true potential, hiding behind comfortable lies while high execution operators leave you behind. Stay right here. Over the next few minutes, we will strip away the psychological armor of excuses, expose the biological mechanisms behind self-deception, and give you the tactical blueprint to build an unshakable execution standard. When you observe a low execution operator, you notice they always possess an intricate, highly detailed narrative for why things didn't work out. They speak about traffic, poor management, exhaustion, bad luck, or lack of support. To them, these are objective facts. But in human profiling, we recognize that the human brain is a master rationalization machine. Its primary directive is not to make you successful. Its primary directive is to conserve energy and shield your fragile self-image from the searing pain of failure. The moment you fail to achieve a target, your mind immediately searches the environment for a scapegoat so you can say, "It wasn't my fault." An excuse is a biological defense mechanism built to protect a weak internal baseline. When you set a goal, your brain evaluates the friction required to achieve it. Real execution demands high discipline, discomfort, and the vulnerability of being judged purely on your output. When the friction becomes too high, your subconscious looks for an exit ramp. An excuse provides that exact exit ramp. It allows you to abandon the effort without suffering the emotional damage of admitting you lacked the discipline to complete it. You keep your self-esteem intact, but at the cost of your actual progress. Every time you utter an excuse, you perform an act of self-castration regarding your personal authority. You tell yourself and the world that you are a passive passenger in your own life, entirely at the mercy of weather, traffic, mood, or other people's actions. High-status, sovereign operators operate under a fundamentally different paradigm: radical, absolute accountability. If something goes wrong, they do not look outward. They look at their own systems, their own preparation, and their own execution. The moment you take total ownership of every outcome, good or bad, you reclaim the power to change it. You think people buy your stories, but their subconscious registers the truth instantly. When a person delivers an excuse, subtle nonverbal glitches betray their lack of certainty. Their voice pitch fluctuates. Eye contact breaks or becomes overly aggressive. Micro-expressions of shame appear around the mouth, and their posture collapses slightly. Surrounding operators pick up on these signals immediately. They categorize you not as an unfortunate victim of circumstances, but as a weak liability who cannot be trusted with high-stakes responsibility. Your excuses don't save your reputation, they dismantle it. The reason excuses survive is because you allow a negotiation phase between decision and action. When the alarm goes off at 5 a.m., there's a tiny window where your brain begins negotiating. It's cold, I didn't sleep well, I'll work out twice tomorrow. That negotiation is where excuses are born. To kill your excuses, you must eliminate the negotiation phase entirely. You must train your central nervous system to move from impulse straight to execution without allowing the mind time to manufacture rationalizations. When a task needs to be done, you execute. No debate, no story, no hesitation. If you want to achieve true psychological sovereignty, you must adopt an absolute execution standard. From this moment forward, remove the phrase "I couldn't" from your vocabulary and replace it with "I didn't prioritize it." Stop blaming your genetics, your past, your environment, or your energy levels. The universe does not care about your stories, and neither does reality. Results are the only currency that carries weight. When you strip away every comfortable lie you tell yourself, you are left with cold, unvarnished truth. Your life is a direct reflection of your standards. The biological deception of excuses represents a sophisticated, low-energy survival mechanism hardwired into the human nervous system to protect the ego from the painful reality of personal failure. When an individual sets an objective or faces an operational demand, the brain instantly performs a rapid cost-benefit analysis. Achieving high-level targets requires significant energy expenditure, prolonged discomfort, and the willingness to face potential social rejection if output falls short. Because the ancient architecture of the human brain is fundamentally designed to conserve biological resources and preserve social standing within a tribe, it perceives raw failure as a direct threat to survival. To mitigate this threat, the subconscious mind deploys an excuse, a prepackaged, logical narrative designed to absorb the blame for a suboptimal outcome before the ego suffers structural damage. This process functions as a psychological painkiller, creating a synthetic boundary between an individual's self-image and their actual execution. When a task is abandoned or a target is missed, the brain experiences an immediate spike in cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable friction between believing oneself to be capable and witnessing evidence of incompetence. Rather than resolving this dissonance through increased effort, discipline, or radical self-honesty, the subconscious mind chooses the path of least resistance. It scans the immediate environment for external variables that can be framed as primary causes: physical fatigue, unpredictable weather, insufficient time, uncooperative colleagues, or inadequate resources. By binding the failure to these external circumstances, the individual constructs a compelling illusion of victimhood, allowing them to maintain their internal narrative of competence while completely evading accountability. From a behavioral profiling perspective, an excuse is not a rational explanation, but a subtle form of self-directed manipulation. The individual convincing themselves of their excuse is engaging in automated self-deception, using sophisticated linguistic frameworks to soften the blow of mediocrity. The brain rewards this behavior by releasing a small wave of neurochemical relief once the excuse is accepted, effectively conditioning the individual to repeat the pattern whenever future friction arises. Over time, this mechanism hardens into a default operating system. The neural pathways associated with rationalization become reinforced, making it progressively easier to surrender to difficulty and progressively harder to access the deep willpower required for sustained execution. The individual remains trapped in a perpetual loop, mistaking their elaborate stories for objective truth, while their actual capacity for sovereign action systematically atrophiates. Ultimately, relying on this biological deception surrenders internal authority to external randomness. When you allow your subconscious to prioritize short-term ego protection over long-term capability, you train your central nervous system to default to powerlessness whenever conditions are less than ideal. High execution operators recognize that the brain's instinct to manufacture rationalizations during moments of high friction is an evolutionary relic, a protective habit that must be actively identified, dismantled, and overridden. By seeing the excuse for what it truly is, a biological trick designed to comfort a fragile identity, an individual can bypass the mind's automatic defense systems, look directly at cold, unvarnished performance data, and begin building an unshakable standard of real-world output. Every interaction you engage in operates within an invisible psychological architecture known as the frame. In behavioral mechanics, the frame dictates who holds the situational authority, whose reality is being accepted, and who is reacting to whom. When you vocalize an excuse, you are not simply transferring information or offering a benign context for a failure. You are performing a catastrophic and immediate surrender of your frame. By stating that you lacked time, resources, or ideal conditions, you explicitly declare that external variables hold more power over your life than your own internal standard. You are broadcasting to the world that you are a subordinate operator, entirely at the mercy of environmental friction. This act of vocalizing powerlessness completely dismantles your personal authority, shifting you from the position of a sovereign creator into the passive role of a reactive victim. This surrender occurs on two distinct simultaneous levels, the first of which is entirely internal. The human nervous system is an adaptive feedback loop that listens relentlessly to the language you use to describe your reality. When you validate an excuse, you are programming your subconscious mind with a script of learned helplessness. By telling yourself that a missed deadline was the result of a chaotic schedule, or that a failed objective was due to someone else's incompetence, your brain biochemically registers that it does not need to adapt, improve, or exert discipline. It learns that it can simply manufacture a narrative to escape accountability. Over time, this neurologically wires your baseline to seek the path of least resistance. You systematically erode your internal locus of control, training your mind to instantly default to powerlessness the moment you encounter operational friction. You stop looking for tactical solutions because your brain has already been conditioned to look for a convenient scapegoat. On the external level, the damage to your social leverage is equally devastating. Human beings are biologically hardwired to assess the status, reliability, and threat level of surrounding operators within milliseconds. When you offer a rationalization to a colleague, a partner, or a superior, you mistakenly believe you are preserving your reputation. In reality, you are leaking massive amounts of low-status data. The subconscious mind of the person listening bypasses the logic of your words and directly reads the behavioral mechanics of your delivery. They register the slight upward inflection in your voice, the micro-expressions of seeking validation, and the subtle collapse of your physical posture. These nonverbal indicators instantly categorize you as a liability. The surrounding network stops viewing you as an apex operator who can handle high-stakes pressure and begins viewing you as a fragile entity that requires management and supervision. Contrast this with the mechanical reality of radical ownership. When a high-status individual fails, they do not negotiate with the environment, and they do not attempt to mitigate the damage to their ego through storytelling. They absorb the full weight of the failure. By stating that they simply failed to execute or did not prepare adequately, they perform a counterintuitive maneuver. By accepting total blame, they instantly centralize all the power back onto themselves. They signal to their environment that they are the absolute authority in their own life, entirely responsible for both victory and defeat. This zero-excuse standard forces surrounding operators to respect their unyielding frame and commands the subconscious mind to immediately begin calculating a high-friction solution rather than searching for a low-energy escape hatch. The comfort of manufactured victimhood operates as a synthetic psychological buffer, providing individuals with a safe harbor where they can feel morally righteous in the face of absolute operational failure. When an individual attempts a difficult objective and falls short, the ego faces an immediate existential crisis. Admitting that the failure was the direct result of poor discipline, inadequate preparation, or weak execution creates severe internal friction. To evade this excruciating realization, the mind constructs a narrative of victimhood, reframing the individual not as an underperforming operator, but as an innocent target of unfair circumstances. This psychological maneuver provides instant emotional relief, allowing the individual to wrap themselves in a blanket of self-pity, while transferring the blame onto external forces beyond their control. This manufactured victimhood is particularly insidious because it provides a false sense of moral superiority. By casting external variables, such as bad luck, toxic environments, or unsupportive people, as malicious villains, the individual paints themselves as the noble protagonist who fought bravely against impossible odds. This shift in framing completely alters the internal calculus. Failure is no longer a personal inadequacy to be corrected, but a tragic outcome to be mourned. The individual receives the neurochemical reward of feeling misunderstood, righteous, and victimized, which temporarily soothes the sting of disappointment. They trade the long-term, high-value asset of personal growth for a cheap, short-term hit of emotional comfort, choosing to stay broken so long as they can remain blameless. In behavioral profiling, this mechanism is recognized as a form of learned helplessness that creates a self-reinforcing psychological trap. Once an individual learns that playing the victim shields them from judgment and accountability, victimhood becomes an addictive operational strategy. Whenever they encounter friction, their immediate instinct is not to push harder or adapt their tactics, but to look for how they are being mistreated or disadvantaged by the situation. They begin actively scanning their environment for reasons why success is impossible, subconsciously sabotaging their own efforts just to validate their underlying narrative of powerlessness. They build a fortress out of their grievances, insulating themselves from the harsh demands of reality, while systematically destroying their own capacity for sovereign action. The ultimate cost of this manufactured comfort is the total erosion of personal sovereignty. When you adopt the identity of a victim, you hand over the steering wheel of your life to the very circumstances you complain about. You accept a passive existence where your achievements, emotional state, and future trajectory are entirely dictated by external randomness. While the victim narrative offers a warm, comfortable space to hide from the pain of failure, it simultaneously locks you inside a prison of your own making. Reclaiming your baseline requires stripping away this synthetic buffer, rejecting the cheap solace of self-pity, and accepting the cold, liberating truth that your results are a direct reflection of your own choices and standards. The nonverbal leakage of incompetence is the unspoken behavioral mechanism that instantly exposes an excuse for what it truly is, a desperate, low-status attempt to evade accountability. While the conscious mind works frantically to craft a logical, believable narrative about why a target was missed or a standard was compromised, the central nervous system operates on an entirely different level. The human body is a high-bandwidth broadcasting system that continuously leaks real-time psychological data. When an individual delivers a rationalization, their physiological state is dominated by subconscious friction, internal shame, and the fear of social exposure. This internal conflict manifests as a distinct suite of nonverbal microbehaviors that surrounding operators pick up on instantly, completely undermining the verbal narrative being presented. During the delivery of an excuse, nonverbal indicators betray the speaker's lack of genuine conviction. Vocal mechanics are often the first point of failure. Pitch tends to shift upward as the vocal cords tighten under subconscious stress, and speech cadence becomes either rushed, attempting to push the lie past the listener, or overly hesitant, littered with filler words as the brain builds the narrative on the fly. Simultaneously, visual leakage occurs across the face and body posture. Eye contact becomes either unstable and evasive, breaking away at the exact moment of accountability, or overly rigid and fixed, artificially simulating confidence in a way that triggers instinctual distrust in the observer. Subtle micro-expressions of shame, contempt, or anxiety flicker across the facial muscles in milliseconds, contradicting the overt expression of innocence being forced onto the face. Physical posture and spatial mechanics further emphasize this loss of status. When a person shifts into a defensive posture to deliver an excuse, their body instinctively shrinks, shoulders round inward, and physical gestures become tight, self-soothing, or defensive. These micro-behaviors are non-verbal signals of submission and powerlessness. To surrounding humans, whether managers, colleagues, or romantic partners, these cues bypass conscious logic and register directly within their primitive threat assessment hardware. The observer's brain automatically decodes these signals and reaches an immediate, unvarnished conclusion. The speaker is displaying low authority, lacks internal baseline stability, and is attempting to manipulate the situation to cover up a personal vulnerability. The tragic irony of relying on excuses is that the speaker believes their carefully chosen words are protecting their reputation, when in reality their nonverbal leakage is systematically destroying it. People rarely remember the specific details of a well-crafted story about traffic, fatigue, or external delays, but they permanently record the impression of weakness, unreliability, and lack of accountability conveyed through body language. Surrounding operators instantly adjust their perception, downgrading the individual's social and professional standing. The excuse maker is permanently categorized as a high-risk, low-execution liability who cannot be trusted with critical responsibility. Ultimately, no amount of verbal fluency can mask the physical reality of a collapsed frame, proving that non-verbal leakage will always expose incompetence long before the story ever finishes being told.